Welcome to the Neutral Podcast, where we discuss paving the way to a sustainable tomorrow. I'm Nate Helbach, your host, founder, and CEO of the Neutral Project, a sustainable real estate development company. Join us each week as we host world-renowned guests and explore dynamic landscapes of real estate development, alternative investing, sustainability, forestry, urbanism, and new cutting-edge carbon-neutral construction materials that are shaping the cities of tomorrow. Maybe to start us off, Dirker, you could give us just a little bit of background on yourself before we dive into your academic and professional career.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nate. Happy to be on the show. So I have spent the last 20 plus years working in the construction industry and specifically aimed at industrialized construction. And I have also split my time in various periods. I have been in academia, and then I've been in industry, and then so I've been back and forth in academia and industry over these 20 years, and that has been very rewarding and interesting to me. I think it's really good to connect these two worlds, because I think we have a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, no, for sure. Maybe we could start off with a little bit more about your academic background, and then we can go into the industry background, and I think they're both so intertwined. But maybe just give us a little background on where you went to grade school. I know you grew up in Sweden, but then also how you got all the way to Lund and finished your PhD there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but as you said, it's actually pretty intertwined. But I'll try to go through it. So I did my master's program at Lund University too. Then I went to industry for a couple of years, and the company I worked for then was Tyrens. And interesting with Tyrens was that they also could fund academic work. So that's how I came back to the university, because the company I worked for funded my a research project that I should do. So then I spent 2.5 years at Lund University again, but hired by the company, so I could go back and forth a little still to sort of anchor the findings and also get case studies from the company. So, but this was in 2006. So I finalized my what we call in Sweden licentiate thesis in 2006. And it was about industrialized construction, and I presented a framework about that and to describe and explain what industrialized construction in a modern way, so to say, is all about. Then I went back to industry, went back to Lund, to the company, worked for 5 years with these principles and with companies interested in this. But after those 5 years, I felt, because licentiate thesis is halfway to PhD. So then I thought, maybe it's nice to do the full PhD. So then I applied for a little more funding, got that, and then could finalize my PhD in 2015. Good thing it was that then, of course, I had pretty solid ground to stand on that I could use also in my academic work, in my thesis. So I presented the PhD thesis in 2015, and just after that, I left Tyrens and joined BoKlok, which is a company working only with industrialized construction, a housing company. It's a joint venture between IKEA and Skanska, but we can come back to that maybe and dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the background. And during my academic, two sort of deeper academic periods, I established collaboration with Stanford University. First time in 2013 I was invited as a visiting guest researcher. So I came over and I also gave a little course on industrialized construction, and it became very popular. So I was invited back the year after in 2014, and we also created a conference on the same topic. And then it has just been going on since then. So I've been doing this course and giving this course since 2013. So or earlier this year, we celebrated 10 years for the course, and in coming February, we'll celebrate the 10th edition of the Industrialized Construction Forum, which is the conference we have at Stanford every year. So it's been a really interesting journey and collaboration, of course, to not only going back and forth between industry and academia, but also going back and forth over continents and bringing knowledge back and forth. So that's been super rewarding for me, and I think also for many different organizations, companies, and research institutions that have been involved in that as well.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome experience. Thanks for telling the story. Daniel and I got back from Stockholm actually 3 weeks ago, and it was really interesting. We went and saw Sodra, and then went and visited the KLH factory in Austria and the Binderholz factory. And it is just so interesting to see the way of construction in Europe versus the US, and it's much different. So I'm sure over 2 decades, seeing that has been really intriguing for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I would just want to give a shout out to is the conference, Industrialized Construction Forum. I'm excited to join. Daniel and I are going to be there in February, but I do think it's a great conference. It's probably top conference in the world for construction. So that's really cool that you founded that and started that. Going back to just finishing up kind of your dissertation that you did in 2006 and in your final thesis in 2015, what was kind of the impetus for you to want to study industrialized construction before you started your dissertation? Like, what was intriguing about this concept?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I think it was, I was actually, then if we go back a little into what I had been doing in industry, I had then worked for short periods. I had worked for a supply chain management company with a digital system. I had worked also at Thesis construction engineering firm, but also involved in innovation projects with wood building systems innovation. And I had also been a co-founder of a small consulting firm, more oriented to innovation and process development. So I had this sort of spread, digital, process, and engineering. And then there was a lot of talk about industrialized construction. The construction industry in the early 2000s in Sweden was a lot of focus on we need to develop. There were some, call it scandals or some high-profile projects that were failed. So it was a lot of talk about we had to develop our industry. And a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations mentioned industrialized construction. That's a really interesting way of developing our industry. But the explanations of what the content of industrialization was, that varied a lot. So ranging all the way from partnering to BIM to prefabrication and to logistics and so on and so on. And I was interested in all of that, but I also thought and felt that it can't be all these different things. So I got really interested in it and started to investigate it in my research. And I found out that, in a way, they were all right, but they were kind of also all wrong, because what I found out was that it has to be joined together. We have to join together the process orientation, the prefabrication, or at least the production methods we choose, and we have to have supply chain management and logistics, and we have to learn from other industries working with long-term relations and a really strong customer focus, and so on and so on. So all that was what I saw that was needed to be as ingredients, so to say, in a concept that we could call industrialized construction. So that's so there was a lot of talk about it. It varied a lot, and that got me interested in like, okay, but what is it? And then so that's what I tried to investigate and shed some light on, and also presented my view on that, and it has worked out pretty well in that sense that the models and the framework is still pretty valid, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, for those that haven't read Jerger's thesis or dissertation, we'll have it on the website. But the dissertation that was published in 2006 is called the Industrialized Housing, Building, Concept, and Process. And then his final thesis is called Industrialized House Building, Conceptual Orientation, and Strategic Perspectives. And we'll add those. But it's, I think, a great read, especially if you have a few hours to sit down with a cup of coffee to go through it. Maybe we can go into a little bit of your professional career now and just talk about maybe how you started with your consulting firm, and then all the way to BoKlok, and then what you're doing today again with now your own advisory and consulting firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, as I said, I started off in early 2000s, working in a couple of different places. First as at this supply chain management company with a digital system, gave me some insights about that. Then went to Rennes for a period working with this development project, one of the first wood-based building systems we developed here in Sweden, actually. That was super cool, and it gave me a lot of insights already then that, this is cool, because if we solve these technical solutions really well once, so to say, then we can benefit from these solutions in several or even many projects over and over, and we can also work on improvements between the projects. Wow. So that was a really nice eye-opener. Then I took sort of as a sabbatical, and I was a co-founder. I was invited to be a co-founder of a small consulting firm where we worked with innovation projects and process development, logistics and supply chain management and build the building process. That was also very eye-opening, that me as then more of a traditional engineer realized that, okay, it's not only about technical solutions, it's very much about how we work together, how we develop things, how we launch innovations and all that. I mean, the whole building process. So that was also very eye-opening. And then I got, as I explained before, I got the opportunity to do the research project on industrialized construction. And it gave me an opportunity to actually to melt all these different aspects of technical development, process development, digital development, to melt that together into the framework and work with that from a sort of holistic view. So then I did the academic work, but came back to Rennes, and that was of course super cool to have done research and then apply it in many different consulting assignments. So me and the team I worked with got the opportunity to really apply these principles in industry for 5 years many different ways, many different companies, some really deep collaboration projects. We worked for one company, for example, with for 3 or 3.5 years. So it was, we almost felt as we worked for that company because we were so deeply involved in their development. So that was really interesting. And then back again, as we talked about, to academia. And when I was done with my PhD, came to BoKlok. And so going then from being a consultant, working with many different assignments or many different companies, I mean, going to one company, but on the other hand, to be really deep into one company was, of course, very, very interesting and rewarding as well. And then I worked with, I had the role as head of research and development. And in that role, we worked on many different things, of course, but it was, we transformed our factory into a very developed and automated factory. We worked with the site production methods and so on. We developed our way of working with our product platform, the structure of that and the digital support for that. A lot of sustainability initiatives, of course. Our customer offering, what that should be and how we should structure it. Yeah, as I said, digitalization in different ways, Internet of Things, applications, and so on. So it was a wide variety of research or development and innovation projects that we worked on in BoKlok, not least also a net zero building concept that we developed. Very, very cool with advanced energy solutions, or solar electricity, solar heat, windmills, and some cool water appliances and so on. Very, very broad array of innovation activities within this very industrialized and product-oriented company of BoKlok. So we have covered some ground in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. Could you describe just for our audience kind of what BoKlok does? And I know they're a joint venture between Skanska, which is a construction company in Sweden, and IKEA, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with as the big blue stores across the U.S.
Yeah.
They're also a big furniture company. So just give us a little more background there.
Yeah, so BoKlok was founded already in 1996, based on the idea of the founder of IKEA, Ingvar Kamprad. So he realized that, okay, there needs to be a way to build homes for the many people, as he said, people with a slightly thinner wallets. And he reached out then to the CEO of Skanska and said, okay, so I have this idea. Do you want should we do something together? Because I know customers, I know how people want to live, but I don't know construction. And so they agreed to do this together, Skanska and IKEA. So that was sort of the spark for the company and the collaboration. And the company is called BoKlok then. And pretty early on, it was clear that, okay, this is not going to be one project here or another project there. It was supposed to be a product and a concept that could scale. And then they realized pretty soon that, okay, then we need to use more industrialized principles to make this happen. So what they did was that they analyzed the market, tried to understand who are the customer here, what do they want, what can they pay, where do they want to live, how do they want to live, and so on. So customer understanding. Then they translated that into a product. At the time, pretty simple product, you could say, a 2-story building with 6 apartments in that could be built in groups. So that was sort of the product, and then they created the production system to realize this, to execute. And I think this is not only to give the history and the story of BoKlok, because I think this is also a very smart way to set up industrialized construction concepts. If you understand your customer, you translate that into a product, and then you create your production system, then it's more likely that you hit it right, instead of investing a lot in a factory and then trying to figure out what to build and try to find the customer. That's a little more tricky way to do it. So this turned out to be a success. It started off in Sweden, but it expanded also to Norway and Finland, and lately also to the UK. And the company has built more than 15,000 homes since the start. Always with this very strict product focus, always industrialized production of modules, wood-based modules, and then a very rapid and efficient assembly process on the site, and then complementing work, of course, to finalize the project into a building. Also added, it also had, since it was so product oriented and the relation to IKEA, there was also a brand to it, very, very deep customer understanding and knowledge, and so on. So I think it's I'm biased, of course, but I think it's a very interesting and good example of how industrialized construction concept and product can work and also turn out to be very successful.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so with BoKlok, they were only doing like multifamily, as we would call it in the US, buildings. They were not doing single family houses. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Not one of single family houses, but we also did row houses. So row houses in a group of maybe something between 15 and 35 houses in a project. So in a way, it's a type of multifamily project, but it's a smaller scale. And then we had two product families: the row house product family and the multi-story product family, up to, in Sweden at least, up to 4 stories.
Okay.
So low-rise buildings, of course, but still pretty different. Of course, the apartment buildings and the row house buildings are, of course, different, as we call it, product families.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was kind of like type 3 or type 5 construction that we would have in the US as one family, and then the other product family was more townhome focused.
Exactly. Townhouse is a better way to describe it. Exactly.
Interesting. Cool. Well, moving on into the next segment, I want to just talk a little bit about industrialized construction, because I think some of our listeners might not understand or know the term or familiar with it. And I think you probably have the definition. You're the founder of the definition, I would say. So if you could define industrialized construction for us, I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, well, so a little dry definition, like a sentence, would be, and bear with me, listeners, if you think this is too dry, but industrialized construction is a thoroughly developed building process with a well-suited organization for efficient management, preparation, and control of the included activities, flows, resources, and results, for which highly developed components are used in order to create maximum customer value. The last 3 words, I think, are really important. Maximum customer value, super important, because if we don't do that, then there's actually no point doing all the rest. So it's super important to have a strict customer focus, and we really know what to do in that sense. So that's sort of as a definition. And then a model that I mentioned before, a model to describe this is a model with 8 fields, and actually 8 plus 1 field that contain the 8 plus 1 areas that I think are needed in order to create an industrialized construction concept. And these fields, maybe we should go through. I don't know. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I think we'll come back to the 8 fields and maybe just go through real quick kind of like what the industrialized construction method is. Because I think it would help just to further explain like why this is important and why the current method is maybe not useful or not productive.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think let's maybe go back to just like discussing what the difference is between industrialized construction versus traditional construction, because I think a lot of people in the US, as we've been presenting this vanilla kind of concept, have come up to me and say, well, why do we need this? Like, we're building buildings, we can keep building buildings, there's no problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, jumping back in here, I think maybe Jurger, if you could just explain to the audience what the difference between industrialized construction is versus a traditional construction method like most of us see every day with cranes going up and buildings being built. Why do we need this new method of construction?
Yeah, first of all, I think we are many that agree that this, if we call it the traditional construction process, has some challenges in terms of productivity, in terms of profitability, in terms of safety, in terms of sustainability, performance, and so on. So we have some challenges to deal with. And I think one really big difference in an industrialized approach and a more traditional, or let's call it a project-oriented approach, a big difference is continuity. So the level of continuity in an industrialized construction concept is much higher because we can work with technical solutions on a continuous basis, as I mentioned before. The same goes for processes and working methods and relations between all the different actors in the process. And since we work with continuity, we can also work with optimization, because we can dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and all the learnings we make, both in sort of development, but also experience and knowledge gained in projects, we can turn into input for further development and optimizations. So this system, both the technical system and the processes that we anchor it with, they get better and better. And because of that, we create a more efficient, more reliable, more predictable way of building. And this gets even better if we also have a very good understanding of our customers, what they really want, what they can pay, and so on, as I mentioned with BoKlok. Because then we can really aim for that and deliver on that. So but this is of course super difficult to do in the same way as traditional project-oriented construction. So I think many industrialized construction companies are specialized. They select a segment or a product or a customer group or so and try to focus on that and create excellent solutions for that. But that's really difficult to do for the whole housing market, or for the whole retail market, or for the whole office market or so. So you have to select a niche and you have to be focused on that. When you do that, then that requires also investments product development, and maybe in the production system if you choose to have an advanced sort of fabrication method and so on. So it requires investments into the product and production system, and that's also, to some extent, a contrast to the more traditional way, because we don't really have that articulated product and production system. It's more of a generic industry standard that we use then. So that, I think, those are some of the differences between traditional and industrialized.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary. One of the things that people have come up to me asking as we're kind of trying to deploy this more industrialized construction method that we're going to talk about later in the episode called vanilla, is they're like, why is this needed? And why are you working? It seems like a lot of upfront work for not that much reward. And I think what a lot of non-industry people don't understand is that, like, right now we go and start a new project and it's basically like opening a whole new business. And it's not like we've done 4 or 5 projects and we get to use all that information on this next one. Like, it's basically starting over from scratch, because we're having to draw the whole building, do all our engineering calculations, go through a whole new massing, go through architecture, so it's very project based. And I think that's something you touch on in your thesis, of moving to a process basis and then having projects go through the same process so that it's more efficient once you do multiple projects. And so that's something that we've kind of been trying to explain, I think, to the general public, of why we want to push forward this more industrialized approach instead of staying with kind of the status quo.
No, I think that's a really good point, because I think, in a traditional construction project, in a way, we allow ourselves to be unique in all different ways. Of course, the project is unique. It should be, and that's the nature of construction in a way. But it's a little more hard to understand why we need to have a completely new or unique solution, technical solution, and why we also need to have a uniquely put together team of designers. And then we also allow ourselves to have a uniquely put together team of executors, contractors. That's also, they don't know each other. They need to spend some time before they know who is doing what, and trust each other and so on. We also put together a uniquely structured supply chain of components, materials, transportation, assembly, and stuff like that. So there's so many layers of uniqueness that it becomes a super, super complex system in every project. So once we finally have learned how to do this, we have executed the prototype and we will never do it again. But that's also a good contrast, I think, to a more industrialized or product-oriented approach, because then we try to take advantage of the good solutions that we know are working well, and the experiences that we do. And that's what I mean with continuity. So we take advantage of that and make it a little better in every project, and we can also add some development into it and make some leaps forward in that sense. So I think that's those are also some nice and interesting contrasts to more traditional project orientation.
Yeah. To shift into from a project basis to a process basis, I think you laid it out really nicely in your 8+1 model to allow the industry to actually do this and execute it properly. And so maybe you could just explain kind of the 8 components of your 8+1 method, and then what that last +1 means.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these 8 different areas are planning and control, of processes, technical systems, meaning building system or product platform or whatever we want to call it, prefabrication of building parts, but also long-term relations, logistics, use of information and communication technology, meaning digitalization, but also reuse of experience and doing measurements to really capture what's going well and so on, getting data, in short. And last but definitely not least, customer and market focus. So these 8 areas can then be fueled by continuous improvements. So the continuous improvement is the 9th area that sort of ties all these 8 together. Because the thing with this, you could easily argue that, but technical systems and prefabrication and logistics and digitalization, that's nothing new. We work with that all the time in every project. And that's true, of course. But what is needed here is that we do it in a very systematic way, and we do it in a similar way from project to project, and we let these areas strengthen each other, and then continuous improvements is a good way of doing that. Because, obvious connections are between planning and control of processes and logistics. Those are very well related areas, but also different, of course. But it's really hard to be excellent in logistics if you as a company or network of companies, if you're really poor at planning and controlling your processes. Same goes for technical systems and prefabrication. It's really hard to be good at prefabrication if you don't have a well-developed technical system, and so on. So there are so many interrelations between these areas that we, of course, can solve in one building project, but the real benefits will come after some time when we have worked with this, when we have integrated these 8 areas and worked with continuous improvements, because that's when it starts to become systems that are working well on a continuous basis. And that's when the rewards are coming in terms of productivity, lower costs, better safety, better quality, better sustainability, performance, and so on, depending on what aims we have with our system and our concept, of course.
So this is really allowing companies to step out of the project basis approach and step into the process basis approach, and then using this process and these 8 methods on a project. And then the continuous improvement would mean that the next project the company would jump to, they still go through the same process, but they're taking the lessons learned from the previous project and using it and applying it to the next. Is that a good summary?
Exactly. So it doesn't mean that every project needs to be exactly the same. It's not that we should build identical buildings, but it's about using the same methods. It's about using an array of technical solutions and not starting over from scratch in every project. So to build on previously gained knowledge, that's the thing. And then, of course, you as a company can create your strategy into, okay, do you want to make identical buildings? Okay, then you have, of course, some benefits into that, but you have some other challenges in terms of flexibility and so on. If you want to build super flexible buildings, that's great, of course, but then it's hard to have a high level of predefinition in for the whole building. So then you lose in predictability. So it's a balance in the setup of your strategy and how you want to set that up.
Yeah.
That depends, of course, between companies. So there's not one recipe. That's the thing, I think, here. There's not one recipe on how to work with industrialized construction, but we have 8+1 ingredients, if we allow us the recipe analogy. So we have 9 ingredients, and we can combine them in different ways to create an industrialized construction concept. It doesn't look the same, but we are familiar with the ingredients.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know in your thesis, you went through and you did a case study of a few companies, primarily in Sweden, and then you created this awesome grading scale, which I love. It's a 0 to 4 grading scale. And 0 doesn't mean bad. It just means that there's not that much effort for that specific area. 4 obviously is it's fully implemented. But maybe you could just talk a little bit about what was kind of your reflections from looking at those companies and looking at their current processes and how this 8+1 method would apply to them.
Yeah, absolutely. This method, originally I developed it to assess a company on what level of industrialization or industrialized construction they were on in each of these 8 areas. So then that's why I set up this scale from 0 to 4 for each of the 8 areas, and also then defined what was level 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, how it looked like for these different areas. And then when I visited companies, I could do a pretty quickly do an assessment of what level they were on in prefabrication and in long-term relations and in planning and control of processes and so on. And that could be illustrated then in a radar chart. So it was actually like a graphic illustration of how it looked like. Then I realized that this can actually be used also as the strategic tool, because you could, of course, have a current view of the company, how it looks like right now. But based on that, you could actually also go back to the company's business plan or business idea, say, okay, if you want to have this role or position on the market, but you have this pattern, you have some weaknesses here in some of the areas, then we could actually plot and see that, okay, then we have a gap maybe between where you are and where you should be, and then we could create the development strategy based on that. And what was also super evident was that companies that at the first glance looked quite similar, they had pretty different patterns in their industrialized construction score, if we put it that way. And that's interesting, of course, but I think also very natural, because it's different companies, different market positions, different strategies, different history, different strengths, maybe different ability to invest in their facilities or product platforms and so on. So it can look very differently, and that's the good thing, because it allows us to have many different companies with different sort of patterns, different business models, different business ideas. And that's great, because we want a variety of offerings, of course, on the market, because we want to have a variety in our built environment. So we can have many companies with different ways to address this, but they do it in a systematic way, and they have chosen their niche, and they have chosen their way of working. That's the thing, not changing that in every project, because then it's really hard to be efficient and predictable and exactly, and have high quality.
Yeah. Well, switching to the next segment here, talking a little bit about the outside in and inside out methodology and perspective. For the audience, could you just describe briefly what the outside in and inside out perspectives are?
Yeah, absolutely. The outside-in perspective is what can be called a market-based view. That's about analyzing the market, finding sort of your customers or identifying your customers' needs, and then create an offer to sort of fulfill those needs, and then create a system or so to execute it. So that's more of a outside-in perspective. An inside-out perspective is more of a resource-based view. Then you, as a company, you have existing capabilities, core competencies, and that's your strengths. And you use those strengths and capabilities to create the customer offering based on that. And yeah, that can be, I mean, that's pretty common, of course, because existing companies, they have something, and that can be sort of targeted to different customer groups, different products, project types, and so on.
So,
but what's interesting is that these companies, when you look into it a little more, it reveals that they are oftentimes quite differently structured because of the origin, where they come from, if they are resource-based or market-based. So it's been pretty interesting to see the differences in that sense.
Yeah, that is really interesting. By way of example, would BoKlok be a more market-based approach, even though they have kind of resource-based firms investing in them? The entity itself is more market-based, or no?
I would say so. Because it was actually based on this idea of there has to be a way to build good homes for the many people. And what the people at BoKlok did already then, 25 years ago, was like this. They investigated the market, they identified the customers, and really tried to understand that, and then created a product to fulfill those needs, and then created a supply chain and production system to execute it. So I would say definitely that BoKlok was founded on the idea of a market-based view. Then, but this now we're getting into more theoretical discussions maybe, but then of course after time, a company like BoKlok becomes of course also to some extent a resource-based company, because you have invested in your product platform, you have invested in your factory, and so on. So in a way you move a little away from your market-based view into a resource-based. But I think the importance then for a company like that is to keep a balance between your market-based view, really being anchored in your customer orientation, but still being excellent in your execution of that. So that's more of a transition of perspectives, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. We were just in Austria, as I said earlier in the show, and we visited Binderholz, Mass Timber, and they started as a sawmill, and now they've grown into this huge both forest company, but then also manufacturing company with Mass Timber, and then also B Solutions, which is a prefabricated home and bathroom pod company. So would that be more of resource-based because they started with kind of core competencies and now they've grown into this really large product line?
I would say so, exactly. I hear you have read this well, Nate. No, but absolutely a good example of a well-working resource-based company. Inside out, using your strengths, using your deep knowledge in their case, deep knowledge in how to process wood and put that together into systems and deliver in an efficient way and so on. And also, I think a good example of transforming, going from sawmill to sort of woodworking company into a systems delivery company. I think it's a really good example. but maybe not being sort of customer driven in that sense that they see, I mean, like in a market based view, but going from the core competence and then really using that to deliver to customers and to projects in a very nice way. So I think it's a really good example.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a really cool concept. Well, I know we're close on time here, but I want to ask one last question before we conclude. There's been a lot of kind of discussion, and you mentioned this in your thesis about the correlation between industrialized construction and car manufacturing. And recently in kind of the 1900s, there's been this big kind of boom and transition from this more craft-focused production methodology to this very industrialized methodology with cars. And I'm wondering, like, what do you think the correlations are, and what inferences can we draw from the car manufacturing business to the construction industry?
Yeah, no, I think it is very interesting to study other industries and try to learn and then transform that knowledge into our industry. And the car industry is, of course, always interesting because it's so advanced and it has developed so much over the decades. And it's super advanced, super interesting industry, and everybody has some kind of relation also with cars. Just like we have, everybody has a relation to houses and homes and so on. So I think there are some really interesting touch points. What I think we can learn is that many of these companies have a really deep customer focus. All of these companies have a product, they have a brand. These are also often, especially if they're successful, they are very well integrated. And they have not only a product, but they have also a well-developed production system, and they are really integrated, of course. So the production system is there to deliver these products, and only that, nothing else. So that's interesting, and I think that's an example that we can learn from in terms of the specialization and what can come out of that specialization. And that's what I mean with branding, because I think branding is something that we have, it's almost untouched in the housing and construction industry, especially related to the product. So that's super interesting. We can then see that they have long-term collaborations. They have, of course, a lot of development work going into their products and processes and production and so on. Then, of course, everybody realizes that we have huge differences, of course, in the products that we build in construction and the products they build, not least in terms of the lifespan. We have to deal with products that should be there for at least 50 years, hopefully much longer. I mean, we can find buildings today that are thousands of years. And that's interesting aspect that is not on the agenda at all, of course, in the automotive industry. And also, we are actors in the built environment industry. I mean, we create products, buildings that are parts of the built environment, and it affects the whole society and the shared living spaces and cities and communities and so on. And that's something that we really need to be careful about, of course. We want to create good buildings and good societies that will be there for a long time. So that's, I think, some differences. And then when we learn from that industry, I've seen it so many times, it's easy to be really excited about all the opportunities and look at all these robots that they have, and oh wow, we could have that also for producing buildings, and it is, they are true, it's true, they're right. I mean, we can do that, But it takes time also to change an industry. We can't do that overnight, so to say. So we have to be careful when we start doing our investments in advanced systems so that we are sure that we build what the customers want, as we talked about. We have a balance with the customers, with the market, with the stakeholders, and so on. And not least, so that we have a balance in between the investment and the output. How many units will we actually produce, and how much can we possibly invest into that? And again, a learning from BoKlok was a step-by-step approach. BoKlok did not start by investing millions and millions in their production facility. That was done over a very long period of time, and it was definitely a step-by-step approach. And when the concept had proved itself, then the company dared to do some investments. Then they worked on that, then took some steps, and so on. Of course, sometimes we feel that we don't have all that time. I don't mean that it has to take 25 years as it has taken for BoKlok, but I think it has to take some more time than we sometimes think that we can change rapidly. So that's a difference, but maybe also actually a learning that we can see in the car industry, because that didn't happen overnight either. So yeah. Summary is maybe we have a lot of similarities, but we also have some differences, and we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting point that you make, that I think some people in this industry of industrialized construction have just thrown a lot of money at these huge factories without really analyzing what the process is. And that BoKlok method, I think, is actually really smart, because you're kind of starting with the design principles and methodologies, and then you're building your prototype or MVP, and then you're figuring out, okay, what factory do we need? What should the production look like? And then you're spending a lot of money instead of going in the inverse of spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this huge factory without really truly understanding both the product, but also then the customer of who's actually consuming this.
Exactly, because sometimes then then when you design a system like that, then you might think that, oh, we need to have all this flexibility because we need to cover all this ground on the market. And then it becomes a very, very, very complex product, or it is too broad, so you can't specialize in it. And then actually the difference between that and traditional construction is not that big, and then you won't get the advantages out of it. So I'm a believer of specialization, narrow scope, at least at first, and then expand over time when you know, so to say, when you know what you're doing. I think that's a smart way. And if we look at the whole industry, if we have many narrow concepts, well, that's great, because then we have a variety of offerings. That's good. I think it will be hard for one company to have a broad offering and being super efficient and successful in that. I think that is very difficult.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. Well, I know we have to conclude here, but I wanted to give you a second. Do you have anything that you're working on currently that you want to share, or anything about your advisory and consulting business that you're working on right now that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think one or a couple of things are we are working on. One thing is actually at the last stage of maybe industrialized construction is, but it has to be thought of already in the beginning, and that's design for disassembly. So thinking of the end of life stage of a building has to be thought of already in the design of the building system. So we're working on that in a research project at Stanford. So that's very interesting, because the whole idea is, of course, that if we have a system and we have prefabricated elements or modules, those are good conditions for disassembly. And at some point when we need to take down a building, then we don't have to tear it down. We can actually disassemble it and reuse the elements, the modules or material in a smart way. And that goes, of course, into circularity and sustainability. So that's very interesting. I think the industrialized construction has really interesting opportunities there to make a difference. But we need to think about it. We do have to do some research and some development. So that's interesting. I think, of course, the whole digitalization development, not least, I think, how to structure product platforms, all the variants and components and all that, how to use digitalization to work with that in an efficient and a good way. That's ongoing, and we see a lot of different configurators and systems that can deal with that, and also actually integrate sort of the product, the platform design part and the production part. That's where I think digitalization can play a super important role. And as I said, the whole circularity and sustainability aspect is super interesting. And again, I think industrialized construction with continuity, with predictability, with high level of optimization. I mean, all these lines cross with sustainability and circularity. So that, I think, says something that industrialized construction has a good future also when we look at sustainability and circularity aspects. So that feels really good, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds awesome, of all of the things you're working on, and very exciting. Jurgen, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It was really great to talk to you and learn more about industrialized construction. I definitely learned a lot going through your thesis and talking today. For the listeners, we're going to have in the show notes and then also on our website on the episode page a link to the thesis that Jurgen has, and then also some of his published work. So if you guys want to learn more, please go and read some of that material. But thanks for coming on today, Jurgen, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Nate. Pleasure being here.
At the Neutral Project, we're not just building structures. We're building a legacy of sustainability, helping align your investments with a sustainable future. We'd like to thank you for being part of this conversation. For more information and to stay up to date on how we're reshaping the future through environmentally conscious development, visit our social media accounts or our website at theneutralproject.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Neutral Podcast.